Hello, get ready for a new story I'm about to tell you, right here on my channel. Please subscribe to my channel, it's just one click for you and means a lot to me. Hold on, you little scum, the second husband shouted, grabbing a belt from the dresser and swinging it at the 10-year-old girl, while her mother adjusted her phone's camera and encouraged her son with enthusiastic exclamations. A few hours later, a dark car pulled up to their house, and two men in formal suits stepped out. What happened to them afterwards changed the lives of the entire family forever. Porcelain shards scattered across the kitchen floor as the cup slipped from the child's hands. Anya froze, staring at the white fragments at her feet, and her lips trembled as she understood what was about to happen. Igor tore himself away from the TV in the living room, hearing the sound of breaking dishes. "You little scum. Again, your hands are growing out of the wrong place," he bellowed, bursting into the kitchen and grabbing the girl by the shoulder. Anya tried to pull away, but the man held tight. His fingers dug into her thin arm. Valentina appeared behind him, wiping her hands with a kitchen towel. "What have you done now?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the shards on the floor. There was not a drop of sympathy in her voice, only irritation and a kind of malicious satisfaction. Igor pushed Anya towards the wall, and the girl hit her back against the refrigerator. How many times had he told her, "Don't touch the dishes, your hands are as clumsy as your mother's." Igor unbuckled his belt, pulling it out of his jeans loops. The leather belt fell to the floor with a metallic buckle clanging, and the man picked it up, folding it in half. Anya pressed herself against the wall, covering her face with her hands. Valentina pulled out her phone from her robe pocket and turned on the camera. Her face lit up with anticipation, as if she was about to film a festive concert, not a child beating. "That's right, show her who's boss in this house," she encouraged her son, aiming the lens at the girl cowering by the wall. The first blow landed on her back, and Anya screamed in pain. The belt left a red stripe on her thin skin, visible through her light t-shirt. Igor swung again, and the leather sliced through the air, striking the girl's legs. "Finally, you're acting like a real man," Valentina exclaimed, not taking her eyes off the phone. She moved around the kitchen, choosing the best angle for filming, like a documentary film director. "This is how you raise a child, so she knows her place." Anya curled into a ball, trying to protect her face and stomach from the blows. Her crying grew louder, but it only seemed to enrage Igor further. He hit methodically, with a kind of sadistic pleasure, enjoying his power over the defenseless child. "Will you grab other people's things again?" he shouted between blows. "Will you listen or not?" The belt left more and more marks on the child's body, and Anya was no longer able to respond, she could only sob and shudder with pain and fear. Valentina zoomed in with the camera to better capture the tears on the girl's face. There was an unhealthy sparkle in her eyes, a mix of maternal pride and cruel satisfaction. "That's the way it should be. Let her remember what happens for disobedience." The sound of keys in the lock of the front door made Igor stop halfway. Marina had returned from work earlier than usual. The meeting had been cancelled at the last moment. Valentina quickly hid her phone behind her back, and Igor threw away the belt and tried to take on an innocent look. Anya slid down the wall onto the floor, pressing against the refrigerator and convulsively sobbing. Her t-shirt was wet from tears, and red marks from the belt appeared on her hands and legs. The girl was afraid to move, afraid to attract attention. Marina kicked off her shoes in the hallway and walked into the kitchen, holding a bag of groceries. Seeing her daughter huddled by the wall, she froze in the doorway. The bag fell from her hands, and the apples rolled across the floor, mixing with the shards of a broken cup. "What happened here?" she asked, kneeling down beside her daughter. Anya raised her tear-stained face, and Marina saw a bruise on her cheek, red marks on her arms. Her heart sank with horror and maternal pain. Valentina stepped forward with a triumphant look, pulling out her phone from behind her back. "Look how your daughter got what she deserved," she said, handing Marina the screen with the recorded video. "And let her know what will happen for disobedience." My son finally showed some character. On the phone screen, a scene of beating unfolded. Igor with a belt in his hand, crying Anya by the wall. Valentina's voice was heard off camera, cheering on her son. Marina watched the recording, and her face grew paler. Her hands were shaking as she held someone else's phone. She broke the cup, Igor justified, buckling the belt back. I told her not to touch the dishes. She's to blame, no need to whine. He tried to look confident, but his voice had notes of concern. Marina silently stood up from the floor, still holding Valentina's phone. The video ended, but she continued to look at the black screen, as if she couldn't believe what she saw. Then she handed the phone back to her mother-in-law without saying a word. Anya, pack your things, she said quietly but clearly. We're leaving. The girl tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't listen. The places where she was hit hurt too much. Marina picked up her daughter in her arms, pressing the trembling child's body against herself. Valentina blocked the way out of the kitchen. Where are you going? Igor had explained. The girl is to blame. You need to raise her with strictness, or she'll grow up as irresponsible as she is. She didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. Marina walked around her mother-in-law without responding to her words. In the bedroom, she took out her daughter's clothes from the closet with one hand, holding Anya tightly with the other. The girl wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and cried quietly, burying her face in her shoulder. Igor appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, watching as his wife packed things into a bag. Are you serious? He asked. You're making a drama out of a couple of slaps. His voice was filled with irritation and misunderstanding. He genuinely didn't see anything terrible in what had happened. Marina closed her bag and headed to the exit, still carrying her daughter in her arms. Valentina blocked her path in the hallway, waving her hands and shouting something about ingratitude and destroying the family. But Marina seemed not to hear her. She opened the door and stepped out onto the landing. The car started on the first try, and a few minutes later, the house was behind them. Anya sat in the back seat, buckled in with a seatbelt, and looked out the window at the passing streetlights. Her tears had dried, but the red marks on her arms still stung. The bathroom in her parents' house was small and cozy, smelling of children's soap and old towels. Marina sat Anya down on the edge of the bathtub and pulled out a bottle of green antiseptic from the medicine cabinet. The girl winced as the cotton swab touched the red marks on her arms and legs, but she didn't cry. It seemed her tears had run out. Mom, am I really as bad as Aunt Valia says? Anya whispered, examining her scraped knees. There was such childlike vulnerability in her voice that Marina's breath caught. You're the best girl in the world, she replied, kissing her daughter's head. No one has the right to hit you, do you hear me? Marina's mother stood in the bathroom doorway, watching as Marina treated Anya's wounds. Her face was grim, her lips compressed into a thin line. We need to go to the police, she said quietly but firmly. This can't go unpunished. I can't destroy the family over one outburst, Mom, Marina objected, not looking up from her daughter's injuries. Igor had promised not to touch Anya again. Maybe he just lost his temper, he's having problems at work. Marina didn't believe her own words, but she spoke them like a mantra. Her mother shook her head and left the bathroom, muttering something about blind maternal love. Marina continued to apply the antiseptic to the bruises, trying not to think about what she had seen on the video on Valentina's phone. The methodical blows, the pleasure in her husband's eyes, the enthusiastic exclamations of her mother-in-law. Anya fell asleep in the nursery, in the same bed where Marina had slept 30 years ago. The girl curled up under an old patchwork quilt, clutching a worn teddy bear. Marina sat beside her, stroking her daughter's hair and listening to her even breathing. The phone rang around midnight. Valentina's name appeared on the screen, and Marina stared at the vibrating device for a long time before answering. Come home immediately, her mother-in-law shouted without greeting. What kind of theater are you putting on? A couple of slaps. Igor's a good guy, he just needs to show some character. Valentina continued, not letting Marina get a word in edgewise. And the girl needs to learn to obey. In my day, children were raised with discipline, and they turned out just fine. Marina listened silently to this torrent of justifications and accusations. I saw the video, Valentina Petrovna, Marina said quietly. You filmed your son beating a 10-year-old child with a belt and enjoyed it. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by nervous laughter. What do you know about parenting? Valentina squealed. Your daughter is completely out of control, and all you do is spoil her. Igor meant well, and you make a scene. Marina hung up the phone and turned off the sound. She didn't have the strength to argue. The next morning, at breakfast, her father silently read the newspaper, occasionally glancing at his granddaughter over his glasses. Anya poked at her porridge with a spoon, eating almost nothing. The bruises on her arms had become more vivid overnight. The green balm didn't completely hide them. Her grandmother bustled around the stove, making pancakes, Anya's favorite treat. Mom, are we going to live here now? The girl asked, putting down her spoon. There was hope in her voice that tore at Marina's heart. I don't know yet, sweetie, she replied honestly. I need to think it through. Meanwhile, Valentina sat in the kitchen of her now empty apartment, scrolling through photos on her phone. Igor had left for work, slamming the door and muttering something about ungrateful wives. She stopped on a video from the previous evening and watched it again. On the screen, her son looked strong and determined, finally showing some character. Valentina had always thought Igor was too soft, too accommodating to his wife. Yesterday, he proved he could be a real head of the household. She opened the family chat on the messenger. The granddaughter has been disciplined, and my son has finally shown some backbone, she wrote, attaching the video to the message. The chat included her sisters, nephews, and younger son, Dennis. Let everyone see that Igor can keep the family in line, Valentina thought with pride. Dennis was heading home after a long day at work at the prosecutor's office. The corruption case involving the city hall was dragging on. Witnesses were changing their testimony, and the defendant's lawyers were setting one procedural trap after another. He was tired of the dirt, tired of having to prove the obvious. In the elevator, he checked his phone for messages. The family chat was buzzing with notifications. His mother was actively discussing something with her sisters. Dennis opened the conversation and saw the video with a caption about disciplining his niece. At first, he didn't understand what was happening on the screen. Then it hit him. His brother Igor was hitting a little girl with a belt, and their mother was filming it on camera, egging him on. Dennis watched the video several times, not believing his eyes. The child's crying, the swishing of the belt, his mother's enthusiastic voice off camera. Memories came flooding back. He was 8 when Igor hit him for the first time, at their mother's command. Dennis had broken a window in the shed while playing soccer, and Valentina had told her older son to teach his younger brother a lesson. To toughen him up, she said, so he'd grow into a real man. Igor was 14 then, and he was hesitant, didn't want to hit his little brother. But their mother insisted, shouted that the boys would grow up to be wimps if they weren't raised with discipline. Eventually, Igor took a belt and whipped Dennis, while Valentina stood by, nodding in approval. Dennis saved the video to his phone's memory and watched it several times, studying every detail. His brother's face, distorted with anger, the child's frightened eyes, his mother's voice, full of sadistic pleasure. These were direct evidence of child abuse. He opened his work contacts and found the number of a colleague from the juvenile department. Tomorrow morning, he would forward the video to the right person. Family or not, the law must work equally for everyone. Dennis turned off his phone and stared out the window at the city at night. Like this video so YouTube knows you're interested in such video stories and recommends more quality stories. Dennis didn't sleep all night, rewinding the video on his phone. Every frame stuck in his memory. The child's frightened eyes, the whip's whistle, the mother's satisfied voice. At 3:00 a.m., he got out of bed and made a strong coffee, realizing there would be no more sleep. Childhood memories surfaced one after another, forming a mosaic of family violence. He was 12 when he first tried to stand up for a neighbor's girl who was being bullied by high school students. He came home with a broken nose and a torn shirt. Valentina didn't bother to ask for details, simply telling Igor to teach his younger brother a lesson for fighting, to build his character, as she put it. At 7:00 a.m., Dennis called his colleague from the juvenile department. "Alexander Mihailovich, I have video evidence of child abuse," he said into the phone. "We need to meet urgently." His colleague didn't ask unnecessary questions, he understood the seriousness of the situation from Dennis's tone. By 9:00 a.m., all formalities were completed. The video was handed over as evidence. A criminal case was opened, and an arrest warrant was issued. Dennis sat in the official car next to the operative and looked at the familiar houses in the neighborhood where he grew up. In half an hour, they were to arrest his own brother. Igor was having breakfast in the kitchen, reading the news on his phone, and sipping tea from the same cup that Anna had broken yesterday. Valentina was bustling around the stove, making him scrambled eggs and talking about her phone conversation with Marina. "Ungrateful," she muttered. "The family is being torn apart over trifles." The doorbell interrupted their morning conversation. Valentina wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, expecting to see a neighbor or the postman. Two men in dark suits stood at the door, and the younger one looked familiar to her. "Denisaka," she exclaimed joyfully. "It's so great that you came to support your brother." Dennis looked at his mother with a cold gaze, the same one he used to study suspects in the investigator's office. "Where is Igor Viktorovich Petrov?" he asked, pulling out his official ID in an official tone. "He is being detained on suspicion of child abuse." Valentina waved him off, not understanding what was happening. "What nonsense are you talking about?" she laughed nervously. "This is a family matter." "What cruel treatment." "The girl got what she deserved, and that's it." Dennis walked past his mother into the apartment, nodding to his colleague. Igor was sitting at the kitchen table, still not understanding the seriousness of the situation. "Igor Viktorovich Petrov, you are being detained on suspicion of committing a crime under Article 116 of the Criminal Code," the operative said, pulling out handcuffs. Igor jumped up from the table, knocking over a cup of tea. "What's going on?" "Dennis, have you gone crazy? Yesterday at 17:45, you beat minor Anna Sergeyevna with a belt, causing her bodily harm," Dennis read out the charge. "Your mother recorded the incident on video and distributed the recording. We have all the evidence." Igor backed away to the window, not believing what he had heard. Valentina was rushing around the kitchen, grabbing her son's jacket sleeve. "Dennis, what are you doing? That's your brother. He's a good father, he was just disciplining the girl." The operative put handcuffs on Igor's hands, who was still trying to explain and justify himself. "We were just disciplining her," Igor shouted as he was being led out of the apartment. "She broke a cup. We had to show her that you can't do that." Dennis followed, not looking at his brother. The elevator was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of the handcuffs. Valentina ran out onto the landing and shouted after the departing men, "This is a family matter, Dennis, how could you? He's your own brother." Her voice echoed off the walls of the entrance hall, but no one turned around. The police car started and drove away, leaving the woman alone with her bewilderment. In the car, Igor tried to get through to his younger brother. "You understand that this is nonsense. A couple of slaps to a child and immediately a criminal case. Dennis, we're family." Dennis looked out the window at the houses passing by and remained silent. Childhood memories were haunting him. He was 15 when he first tried to fight back against Igor. He got such a thrashing that he couldn't walk normally for a week. Valentina had said then that younger ones should respect their elders, and Igor had the right to punish him. For proper upbringing, she explained to the neighbors. At the police station, Igor went through all the procedures: fingerprinting, photography, medical examination. He still couldn't believe what was happening, demanded a lawyer, and shouted about his rights being violated. The duty investigator patiently explained his rights as a detainee and read out the article of the charge. Dennis handed over the video materials as physical evidence and wrote an explanatory note about how he received the recording. His colleagues understood the situation. Family dramas were a regular occurrence in their work. The law is the law, they said. Kinship does not exempt from responsibility. In the evening, Valentina called all the relatives, trying to find support. The aunts sympathized, but couldn't help. Dennis didn't answer his mother's calls, and lawyers demanded a lot of money for defense. The woman sat in the empty apartment and couldn't understand how everything had changed so quickly. Igor spent the first night in the pre-trial detention cell, reflecting on what had happened. The cellmates initially treated him neutrally, but when they found out the charge, the atmosphere changed. In prison, there are their own laws, and those who abuse children are at the very bottom of the hierarchy. The next morning, Dennis called Marina. "Your husband has been arrested," he reported dryly. "There's a video of him beating his daughter. It's direct evidence of a crime." Marina listened, clutching the phone with trembling hands. "I didn't file a complaint," she whispered. "I know," Dennis replied, "but the crime was recorded on video, which my mother distributed. The prosecutor's office acts independently of the victim's wishes in such cases." Marina thanked him and hung up the phone. Valentina, meanwhile, was rushing around the city, trying to find a way to release her son. She visited lawyers, acquaintances, and even tried to reach influential people. Everyone explained the same thing to her: with video evidence, the case would be seen through to the end. By evening, she realized that her only hope was Marina. If the wife withdrew the complaint, if she said that it wasn't that serious, maybe the case would be closed. Valentina got into her car and drove to Marina's parents' house, rehearsing words of apology and requests along the way. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, when Marina was preparing breakfast for Anya. The girl was sitting at the table, carefully spreading butter on bread. The bruises on her arms still hurt with sudden movements. The unfamiliar number on the phone screen made Marina wary. "Marina Sergeyevna, this is Denis Petrov, an investigator from the prosecutor's office," a male voice introduced himself. "Your husband was arrested last night. There's a video of him beating his daughter. It's direct evidence of a crime under the article for child abuse." Marina sank onto a chair, feeling her legs give way. "But I didn't file a complaint," she whispered into the receiver. "The case was open due to the video materials distributed by Valentina Petrovna," Dennis explained. "The prosecutor's office acts independently of the victim's wishes in cases of violence against minors. You'll need to give testimony tomorrow." Anya looked up from her plate, hearing the tense tone of her mother's voice. "What's wrong, Mom?" she asked quietly. Marina stroked her daughter's hair, trying to smile. "Nothing serious, sweetie, just grown-up conversations." But inside, everything was turning upside down from the awareness of the inevitability of what was happening. Valentina arrived at Marina's parents' house around lunchtime, when the family was gathered at the table. She stood by the gate, not daring to enter the yard, and nervously fidgeted with her handbag's handle. Marina's father was the first to notice her through the kitchen window. "Your mother-in-law is here," he said quietly. Marina went out onto the porch, not inviting Valentina into the house. The women looked at each other across the small distance between them. In Valentina's eyes, there was desperation and a childish confusion. She was facing the consequences of her actions for the first time. "Marina, I've come to apologize," Valentina began, taking a step forward. "Igor is a good person, he just lost his temper. He won't touch the girl again. I'll make sure of it." Her voice trembled, and she clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears. "You recorded a video of your son hitting a 10-year-old child with a belt," Marina replied in a steady voice. "And you were happy about it, and then you proudly showed me the recording." Valentina tried to object, but Marina raised her hand, stopping her. "He won't touch the girl again," Valentina repeated desperately. "I'll make sure of it. We can fix everything, just don't destroy the family." She took another step towards the porch, extending her hands in a pleading gesture. "Marina, you understand. Men sometimes lose their temper." At that moment, the front door opened slightly, and Anya's face appeared in the gap. The girl looked out cautiously, hiding behind the doorframe. "And Uncle Igor won't hit me with a belt again?" she asked quietly, addressing Valentina. There was a timid hope in the child's voice. Valentina froze, looking at the bruises on the child's hands and the frightened eyes. For the first time in days, she saw Anya not as an object of upbringing, but as a scared child. "He won't," Valentina whispered. "He'll never do it again." But the words sounded unconvincing even to herself. Anya disappeared into the house, and Marina closed the door behind her. Valentina remained standing by the gate, realizing her mission had failed. She got into her car and sat for a long time, resting her head on the steering wheel. For the first time in her life, her confidence in the rightness of her actions had cracked. In the evening, another car arrived at the house. A middle-aged man in a formal suit got out. It was the same Dennis who had arrested Igor. Marina met him in the living room, where her parents were sitting on the couch. Anya was playing in the next room, but the door was slightly ajar. "I need to explain the situation to you," Dennis began, sitting down in an armchair. "The case was open due to the video. Even if you don't want to be a victim and the prosecutor's office will take action, we have direct evidence of child abuse." His voice was official, but his eyes showed fatigue. Marina nodded, understanding the inevitability of what was happening. "And what will happen to Igor?" she asked. "If the court finds him guilty, he'll face 1 to 3 years of imprisonment," Dennis replied. "Plus restrictions on parental rights and a ban on working with children." Marina's mother leaned forward in her chair. "And your mother, she was also involved in this outrage, wasn't she?" Dennis's expression darkened. "Formally, she didn't commit physical violence, but her actions will be considered as aggravating circumstances. Recording and distributing the video is a separate offense." After the investigator left, the family sat in silence for a long time. The father read the newspaper, but the pages didn't turn. The mother knitted a scarf, but the stitches were uneven. Marina looked out the window at the darkening yard and thought about how to explain to Anya that their lives had changed forever. Meanwhile, Valentina paced around the empty apartment, unable to find a place for herself. She tried to call Dennis, but he didn't answer. Finally, around midnight, he picked up the phone. "Dennis, son, you understand, this is a family matter," she began, her voice trembling with tears. "You're my son. Won't you really put your own brother behind bars?" she cried into the phone. "Igor is a good person, he just showed his character. All men lose their temper sometimes." On the other end of the line, there was silence, and only quiet breathing indicated that Dennis was listening. "Mom," he said finally, softly. "Do you remember how you used to make Igor hit me with a belt when I was a kid? You said it was to toughen up my character." Valentina fell silent, not expecting such a turn in the conversation. "That was a completely different matter," she tried to justify herself. "No, Mom, it was exactly the same," Dennis replied. "You were happy back then when the older son hit the younger one, and you would have filmed it on video if there were cameras on phones back then." His voice was filled with pain that had accumulated over years of silence. The short beeps in the receiver told Valentina that the conversation was over. She collapsed onto the sofa and cried. For the first time in many years, she cried genuinely, without theatrics. The world she considered right and fair was crumbling around her. In the detention center, Igor lay on a narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. His cellmates treated him more and more hostilely after learning the charges against him. One of them, an older man with tattoos on his hands, approached his bed. "You beat your kids?" he asked quietly. Igor tried to explain that it was discipline, that the girl was to blame herself. But the words sounded pitiful even to him. The man listened to his justification and spat on the floor. "We'll talk like men tomorrow," he promised, returning to his place. The night dragged on endlessly. Igor thought about how quickly his life had changed. Just yesterday, he was the head of the family, had a job, and plans for the future. Now he lay in a cell, waiting for trial and an uncertain sentence. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if Sonia had done the right thing. Marina wasn't sleeping either. She sat by her daughter's bed and watched the sleeping child. Anya tossed and turned in her sleep, sometimes whimpering. The nightmares still hadn't released her. Marina stroked her daughter's hair and whispered words of love that the girl couldn't hear. Tomorrow, a new life would begin. Without Igor, without Valentina, without the constant fear for her daughter. But for now, Marina didn't know how to explain to Anya why she had remained silent for so long, watching her suffer. This conversation was yet to come, and it scared her more than any trial. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. The courtroom was full of people, but Marina saw only the judge behind the high pulpit and Igor in the defendant's cage. Anya sat beside her on the bench, tightly squeezing her mother's hand. The girl was pale, but she remained calm. Over the months that had passed since her stepfather's arrest, she had understood a lot. "Tell the court about the nature of the defendant's relationship with your daughter," the judge requested, addressing Marina. She stood up, not letting go of Anya's hand, and began to speak in a quiet but clear voice. Igor constantly found fault with her daughter, called her clumsy, stupid, and said that she was a hindrance to their family. He forbade her from playing in the living room when he was watching TV, Marina continued. He made her redo her homework several times if the handwriting didn't seem neat enough to him, and yelled at her for any little thing, spilled juice, loud laughter, even for breathing too loudly. The judge took notes, occasionally looking up at the witness. Were there any instances of physical abuse before the incident with the beating? Marina fell silent, feeling her throat constrict. Yes, she admitted finally. He pushed her, pinched her arms, and pulled her hair. "I thought it wasn't that serious. Why didn't you contact the guardianship authorities or the police?" the judge asked. Marina looked down, ashamed of her own weakness. "I was afraid of breaking up the family. I hoped I could make him change his mind, protect my daughter. But I was wrong." Anya squeezed her hand tighter, as if forgiving her for all those months of silence. Igor sat in the cage, looking at his wife and daughter. During the investigation, he had lost a lot of weight and looked gaunt. The prison uniform hung on him like a sack. When the judge offered him the opportunity to make a final statement, he stood up and remained silent for a long time, choosing his words. "I didn't mean to harm the child," he said finally. "I just wanted to raise her properly. My father also beat me when I was a child, and I turned out to be a normal person. I thought that's how it was done." His voice trembled, and for the first time during the trial, something resembling remorse sounded in it. "But when I saw that video in the pre-trial detention center, I realized how it looks from the outside," he continued. "I saw not education, but abuse of a defenseless child. I apologize to Anya and Marina." He sat back down, lowering his head. The judge adjourned to deliberate, and a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Valentina sat in the last row, dressed in all black, as if at a funeral. Over the months of the investigation, she had aged several years. Gray roots of her hair, deep wrinkles around her eyes, slumped shoulders. There was no trace left of the former self-confident woman. An hour later, the judge returned to the courtroom. The defendant Petrov Igor Viktorovich is found guilty of committing a crime under Part 2 of Article 116 of the Criminal Code, cruel treatment of a minor. He read out the verdict. to impose a punishment in the form of imprisonment for a term of 2 years. The video recording of the beating is recognized as key evidence in the case, the judge continued. The court also deprives the defendant of parental rights in relation to the minor Petrova Anna Sergeyevna and prohibits him from working with children for a period of 5 years. Igor accepted the verdict silently, just nodding to the guard. After the verdict was announced, people began to disperse. Valentina tried to approach Dennis, who was standing by the exit from the hall. "Dennis, son," she began, reaching out to him. "We're family, we can't do this." He looked at his mother coldly and pulled away from her touch. "You made your choice 20 years ago when you encouraged him to beat me," Dennis said quietly, but loud enough for those around to hear. "And today you did it again when you filmed the child being beaten on camera. I'm not your son anymore." He turned and walked out of the hall without looking back. Valentina was left standing alone among the empty benches. People avoided her, casting condemning glances. She had become an outcast not only in her own family but also in the eyes of society. The video of the beating, which she had been so proud of, had spread across the internet and made her the face of child cruelty. In the pre-trial detention center where Igor was returned after the trial, he was met by his cellmates. News of the verdict spread quickly through the cells. An elderly inmate with tattoos, who had promised to have a man-to-man talk with him, approached his bunk with several companions. "You got 2 years for beating a child?" he asked, sitting down on the edge of the bunk. "They gave you a light sentence, more like for murder. In prison, there are our own rules, and those who abuse children are at the very bottom of the hierarchy." Igor understood what was waiting for him, but he didn't try to resist. Inside, he agreed with their assessment. The first blow landed on his stomach, the second on his face. Igor fell to the floor, and they started kicking him. None of the inmates stood up for him. In prison, there are crimes that are unforgivable. The guards arrived only half an hour later, when the beating was over. Marina and Anya returned home to their parents late in the evening. The girl was tired after a long day in court, but seemed more calm than before. "Mom," she said as they sat in the kitchen drinking tea. "Now Uncle Igor definitely won't be able to beat me again." "Never again," Marina replied, hugging her daughter. "And Mom won't let anyone hurt you again. I promise." Anya snuggled up to her mother, and for the first time in many months, her body relaxed. The fear that had lived inside her for months finally began to recede. "Sweetie, I need to ask for your forgiveness," Marina said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I should have protected you earlier. I shouldn't have kept quiet when I saw you being hurt. Forgive me for being a bad mom." "You're not a bad mom," Anya replied seriously. "You were just scared. I was scared too. But now we don't have to be scared anymore, right?" Marina nodded, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "Right, we don't have to be scared anymore." That night, Anya slept peacefully for the first time in many months. There were no nightmares, no sobbing in her sleep. Marina sat by her bed and looked at her daughter's peacefully sleeping face. Tomorrow, a new life would begin. Without fear, without violence, without constant tension. Meanwhile, Valentina sat in an empty apartment, staring at her phone. The family chat, where she had once proudly sent a video of the beating, was now silent. Relatives had removed her from the group after the trial. Neighbors had stopped saying hello. Even in the store, the sellers looked at her with condemnation. She opened her phone's gallery and found that same video. A few seconds that had destroyed the whole family's life. Valentina looked at the recording for a long time, trying to understand where she had gone wrong, but understanding didn't come. In her picture of the world, children were supposed to obey adults at any cost. Igor lay in a prison hospital with broken ribs and thought about how everything had changed. Just 6 months ago, he was a respected person, had a family, a job, plans for the future. Now, he was an outcast among outcasts, and ahead of him lay long months of survival in conditions where he was considered worse than a murderer. But the most terrible thing was not the physical violence from his cellmates, but the realization that he had indeed hurt a defenseless child. The video he had watched during the investigation had opened his eyes to his own actions. He saw himself from the outside and was horrified. Marina quietly closed the door to the nursery and went to the living room to her parents. "How is she?" her mother asked, nodding toward the nursery. "Better," Marina replied. For the first time in a long time, she was sleeping peacefully. "It seems we can finally start living a normal life." I recommend listening to these 2 stories you see on the screen. I'm sure you'll like them. And in the comments to this video, you'll find a link to a selection of the best stories from all over the internet. Thanks for watching.